Moving on to episode 11, the hero and his friends arrived at the capital, where the king awaited their arrival. The king asked for their help in investigating the phenomenon of the firestone suddenly falling from the sky onto the northern sacred mountain. Its presence was surrounded by a very intimidating aura, raising concerns about a potential major threat. The king instructed that if after their investigation they found any evil entities associated with the firestone, the hero and his companions were expected to handle the situation without hesitation. Previously, the king had also sent Goblin Slayer and his group on a mission to rescue his younger sister. He had high hopes that his sister would be saved from that situation. Goblin Slayer and the others met an old acquaintance, Noble Fencer. She agreed to lead them to the stable so they could prepare to leave. Although in a hurry, the elf felt somewhat uncertain if they would arrive on time. However, the dwarf reassured her that he would use his mantra to speed up their journey. During their mission discussion with the king earlier, the lizard man was surprised to learn that they had to traverse the deepest labyrinth just to exterminate goblins. Nevertheless, he also recognized the joy reflected in Goblin Slayer regarding the mission. Meanwhile, the elf felt a bit concerned about the priestess girl. She feared that the priestess girl might feel compelled to seek revenge after being mistreated by the king's brother. The priestess girl admitted that she felt a slight urge to do so. However, she emphasized that she wouldn't abandon those in need just because of vengeance. As Goblin Slayer and the others were preparing their horses, Sword Maiden arrived in a hurry. Before they set off, she wanted to express her gratitude for their willingness to accept this mission. As usual, Goblin Slayer felt that this was just another job for him. Moreover, Sword Maiden wanted to give them a map of the Death Labyrinth up to the 4th floor. The lizard man was quite impressed as the map was drawn very well. It seemed that Sword Maiden had made the map when she was still an active adventurer. While exploring the labyrinth, Sword Maiden was responsible for mapping it. Goblin Slayer asked why only up to the 4th floor, as they needed to go deeper. Sword Maiden informed them that magical power and miasma spread on the 4th floor. There lay the heart of the Death Labyrinth, and if they wanted to go deeper than the 4th floor, they might not be able to return. That's because they didn't have the item Sword Maiden possessed, which was a glowing blue ribbon. The ribbon was the key to going deeper than the 4th floor. Sword Maiden then handed over the ribbon and prayed for their safe return. With that, they set off towards the Death Labyrinth. After Goblin Slayer and the others had left, Noble Fencer asked Sword Maiden if she didn't want to adventure anymore. Sword Maiden herself was unsure. In the past, she could rise again because of adventuring with her companions. Now she no longer had the courage to face such terrifying things. Noble Fencer then noticed that Sword Maiden's hand was trembling. Now, Sword Maiden only saw herself as a weak woman. She hoped all the goblins would perish. On their journey, Goblin Slayer and the others stumbled upon an overturned horse carriage that was ridden by the king's sister and the butler's older brother. There, the priestess girl found her staff. However, they found no traces of blood or bodies. Most likely, the king's sister was immediately abducted. If not mistaken, the butler's older brother mentioned goblins carrying cursed tools. Perhaps the goblins kidnapped her with intentions of making her a bride, demanding a ransom, or as a sacrifice. The issue was whether they targeted her intentionally or by chance. Even if they had a deliberate plan, Goblin Slayer felt that the goblin strategy was too reckless. For now, they had to head straight to the Death Labyrinth. After their journey, they finally spotted the Death Labyrinth close by. The place was in a snowy hill area. Goblin Slayer found tracks of wolves and goblins, so it was indeed true that the goblins were in the Death Labyrinth. And as usual, the leader of those goblins would be at the top or the deepest part. The elf then asked what strategy they would employ this time. Would they exterminate them with fire, water, or another explosion? Goblin Slayer hadn't decided yet, so he sought others' opinions. According to the lizardmen, if they intended to surround them, it depended on whether they would receive reinforcements from the goblins or not. The arrival of reinforcements was a certainty in waiting. Another option was when there was no other way. However, he was certain that the goblins were unaware of that technique. In the end, Goblin Slayer suggested infiltration. Before they entered, he advised against using any mantras during the fight. After that, they all arrived at the mouth of the labyrinth. They would use their usual formation. Upon entering, the elf realized that this was the first time the priestess girl had explored a labyrinth. Yet, her first time was in the Death Labyrinth. Somehow, the priestess girl's first experiences were always like this. As they ventured deeper, they were faced with numerous paths. The lizardmen suggested finding an elevator to launch an attack on the 4th floor entirely. Being familiar with the map, lizardmen took the lead. Just as they were about to proceed, they suddenly heard goblin noises. Goblin Slayer and the others quickly armed themselves. Indeed, a group of goblins riding wolves approached to attack. Since they were advised not to use mantras, the dwarf found it challenging to counterattack. The elf also felt it was more comfortable to strike with a dagger than arrows in such confined spaces. Goblins continued to emerge without end. Goblin Slayer then asked the lizardmen if there were any doors nearby that could be closed. He had a plan that didn't involve water, poison, or explosions. Then Goblin Slayer threw a bottle of oil towards the goblins. Additionally, he lit a torch he had, causing the goblins to catch fire. They all jumped over the flames to reach the door Goblin Slayer mentioned. Some goblins still remained unburned. Goblin Slayer then used a magical scroll that sucked the remaining goblins into it. He said it was a teleportation scroll. He set its destination to the sky. Those goblins certainly wouldn't survive the fall from such a height. The room they entered after passing through that door was pitch black, so dark that even the elf struggled to see. Moreover, they couldn't start a fire there. They decided to take a short rest. The priestess girl apologized for not being of much help earlier. What could she do? She was told not to use her mantras. The others reassured her it was okay. After all, a priest's duty wasn't to swing weapons and slaughter enemies. Goblin Slayer also mentioned there would be times when the priestess girl would play her part. As they continued their exploration, they eventually found an elevator. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the hero and his group were battling a giant slime monster. Fortunately, the monster's movements were straightforward. They felt the monster absorbed living creatures and learned from it. However, because its current target was simple and weak, it wasn't a significant issue. Around the monster, several dead goblins were visible, seemingly falling from the sky. The hero and his group wondered where they came from. As Goblin Slayer and the others rode the elevator, he mentioned that the goblins here also had hand tattoos like the ones they faced before. He didn't understand the meaning of those tattoos, but he was sure there were spellcasters among them. This meant their best move was to eliminate the spellcasters first. The lizardmen disagreed slightly. They needed to ascertain the number of enemies and their equipment. The dwarf then asked the elf to estimate the number of enemies using her keen hearing. The elf guessed there were probably around 20. However, she couldn't determine the equipment the goblins wore. Moreover, she mentioned she smelled something odd. The lizardmen suspected the goblins were conducting a ritual. Whatever it was best not to inhale it. At that moment, the priestess girl proposed to cast a purification spell on all of them. This way, the air they breathed would be instantly sterilized. Before opening the elevator door, the priestess girl chanted a purification spell as a preparatory step. Afterward, they launched an attack on a group of goblins inside. The dwarf quickly cast his fireball spell to illuminate the room. Thanks to the resulting light, they could see several lifeless bodies scattered around. In the center of the room, there was an altar guarded by a goblin priest. On the altar, the king's sister was seen, seemingly intended for sacrifice. Observing the goblin, the priestess girl corrected that it was a priest, not a shaman. Around the altar, the goblin priest swiftly created a protective barrier upon realizing their presence. The priestess girl felt something amiss. The goblin priest didn't seem to be praying. Nevertheless, the barrier he created remained intact. Upon closer inspection, the priestess girl noticed that the blood spilled from the previous bodies formed a magical circle around the altar. Swiftly, she used her purification power to cleanse the blood. As the blood turned into water, the protective barrier shielding the goblin priest instantly disappeared. In desperation, the goblin priest tried to harm the king's sister, as if threatening to kill her. However, such threats meant nothing to Goblin Slayer. He was determined to mercilessly exterminate all goblins.